You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is Zia.
Mohajerjasbi.
There we go. And we're going to be talking about his award-winning film entitled "Know Your Place." And you've gone to a lot of film festivals. You've won lots of awards. You actually were an official selection at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, which is my hometown.
Okay.
And so happy that you were able to have your show premiere here at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. Zia, let's talk a little. So tell me about you wrote this, you directed it, you produced this film, and it's a very personal film to you. So our audience knows a little bit about what Know Your Place is all about. Why don't you give us the synopsis of this film?
Yeah, sure. Know Your Place follows the story of an Eritrean American family living in Seattle, Washington, and the sort of set against the backdrop of a transitioning city. There's been a huge tech boom up here in the Pacific Northwest, and Seattle's been one of the fastest gentrifying cities of the past decade in the United States. And so set against that sort of that space and this moment in time in Seattle, the film follows the story of Robel Haile, who's a 15-year-old Eritrean American boy, and his sort of misadventure and odyssey across the city of Seattle to deliver a suitcase, which is essentially a care package with medicine and clothes and money and all these things to a woman in their community who's traveling back to his parents' homeland. It's all destined for a sick relative that's back home. Yeah, so that's essentially the story of the film. The story of making the film is a whole other sort of odyssey in and of itself, but that's
The,
essentially the synopsis for
the
you.
synopsis of the, well, let's, do you want to talk about the making of the film?
Sure, yeah. My roots are Iranian American, and well, I guess my roots are Iranian. I'm Iranian American. And my connection to sort of the Habesha community here in Seattle, the Eritrean community here, all started back in like the early 2000s. A really, really good friend of mine, she's like an older sister to me. Her name was Rahwa Habte. She's Eritrean. She had a restaurant and like a community gathering space in Seattle called Hidmo. And it's kind of where I sort of came into my own as an artist and a filmmaker here in the city. It was kind of the central hub for all types of people from all walks of life, from all corners of the city. People would gather there, and I met a lot of, like other filmmakers and photographers and rappers and artists and journalists and teachers and activists and all types of folks that came through Hidmo. Um, and and just a lot of my friends, happened to be of Eritrean descent, and uh, there was sort of a cultural kinship just with my roots, as an Iranian American. And so um, we made a short film actually first in a neighborhood called Yesler Terrace. So Yesler Terrace was the first racially integrated public housing project that was built in the United States after World War II.
Wow.
And a lot of my friends actually grew up in that neighborhood. And so we were sort of inspired to, get together, tell a story that was set in this neighborhood when we all learned that because of Seattle's sort of ongoing redevelopment, this entire neighborhood was to be completely razed and redeveloped. So it's unrecognizable now. It's high rises and mid-rise condos and things like that. But this was where, so many people that I was connected with had grown up in the city. And so one of the sort of missions around making this film was let's cast it all in the neighborhood. So a couple of friends, one is named Futsum Sagai, and another guy, Solomon, who makes an appearance in Know Your Place, introduced me to all the kids in the neighborhood, and we sort of cast from there. And that's how I got connected with Joseph, who plays Robel in Know Your Place, as well as Nati, who plays Fahmi, his best friend. So after this short film was made, there was sort of, the all the energy and the kind of collaboration that went into that felt like, man, there's so much heat left over. It feels like there's more left in the tank. And so I kind of percolated on things for a bit, and then the idea for Know Your Place kind of came to me while I was living in LA actually. Sort of that distance from home and kind of missing my folks and my community and the rain and the trees. I am a sucker for the rain. I can't lie.
I love rain
Um,
too. I love rain too. We don't get enough of it in California. When we have a rainy
right?
day, I'm excited. Yes, it's
Yeah, and I
raining.
remember I moved when I first moved to LA, it was in the midst of like the 4 or 5 year drought around 2013,
Oh.
14. And so it was like I remember it being like 75 degrees in January and being like, this feels so wrong. Like, but yeah, anyway, like I'm
I
trying
can
to tell
relate.
like a story of 5 years in 5 minutes. So sorry if I'm kind of going
No,
on a
no, no, no,
tangent.
no. You're
Um,
fine. Keep
but
going.
yeah, so after that short film and kind of my time in LA, that's when I wrote the script for Know Your Place, and then we kind of got the band back together along with some new people as well. And we shot Know Your Place in the fall of 2018, actually. So it's been a bit of a road getting it to completion. So
Yeah, that is a little bit of a road. So you had said, and when I was doing my research, one of the things is one of the quotes was the localization of cinema is vital. So do you want to
mm,
expand on that and talk a little bit about what you mean by that and why it's
yeah,
so vital?
I feel like um, there's sort of like an kind of extreme things happening with, especially with theatrical releases. I feel like if it's not a stacked sort of cast or a major budget tentpole film and things like that, there's this perception that there's not going to be any interest in the stories being told, or a film isn't sort of worthy of a cinema or these kinds of things. But I feel like when that idea of like localizing cinema is in some way, I feel like the whole you can connect to the whole world just through your own backyard. And sometimes I feel like this idea that um, by being really, really, really specific about things, there's a relatability, I think, inherent in that, and that becomes more universal. So instead of sort of trying to make things that appeal to just four quadrants or the algorithm or whatever it is, I feel like there is such a specific experience of being human that even though, the nuances might be different or the individual experiences of people may differ, sometimes by getting very specific about those things, people end up actually seeing themselves in relation to other people or in relation to other people's experience as well. And you begin to kind of see your shared narrative in that. And I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the things that I think being local about stories you want to tell sort of adds that dimension into both the process as well as the themes that are explored and the relationships that go into making art in the first place and how that ends up showing up on screen. Um, all these kinds of things. I mean, it's almost like another, it's like you go to a farmer's market, right? And the food's just better. So it's kind of the same. It's sort of a similar idea in terms of the way I kind of see film, and so many of my favorite films too are um very much like that, very specific to a place, to a specific time, to a specific moment, and often the stories feel as you know everyday or even mundane in certain ways, but because of that there's a sort of poetry in it or a relatability that you can sort of see yourself projected in even if it's not your own experience. And um, yeah, that's sort of the general idea, I feel like.
You feel, you talked about the area where you grew up has been gentrified and it's unrecognizable. Um, do you feel, because this is happening everywhere, obviously, all over the country and many other cities too. Do you have a feeling where we're losing that sense of community and neighborhood
I
because of
think,
this is happening?
yeah, I mean, it is definitely happening in urban centers across the country for sure. I feel like, I mean, it's also worth noting too that there are a lot of people as well in neighborhoods that are are staking out space for community, you know, and really trying to do the work from a policy standpoint, from an organizing standpoint, with their activism and sort of keeping some spaces alive. And we're also seeing that in Seattle, and I think it's brilliant work. Yeah, at the same time, I feel like I think in some way it's like there are so many invisible barriers that exist, I think, in American society, right? I think there's a sort of mythology of this country as a melting pot, but I feel like it's more like we're still ingredients set out on a counter. We're very separate. I
Very
think,
good. I like that. That's a very
yeah,
good
yeah,
analogy. Yeah.
and I think, there's the invisible lines of segregation are very real and alive and well,
Fortunately.
and the lines of racism and just sort of all the systemic injustices that sort of keep us apart, that I think in some way coming together and making art, there's so many invisible lines to cross in doing that, and really the efforts to make community, and they have to be very, sort of intentional and what's the word, consistent, right? And so I think that has been true for a really long time, and I think what we're seeing now is just the sort of new experience of like sort of our this moment of the kind of systemic factors or energies that are kind of eroding the community that was built up for so many years preceding this moment. So I think a lot of the same work is still to be done, but yeah, I feel that it's not a hopeless future or anything, but yeah, I think it's it's definitely, things feel like they're shifting at a pace that we haven't experienced before, right? Like just the degree and the scale is pretty it's kind of blitzes you, right? It's just like, okay, so it's not just, oh, this block and it's this entire neighborhood, it's this whole community. I still go to coffee shops sometimes, and I realize like my memory or my perception is kind of still stuck in like 2015, where it's like I'm expecting to run into certain people, and then you realize like, oh, they don't live here, actually they moved, they're in Portland, or they're 20 miles south, they're in Kent now, whatever it is, they're in Tacoma. um so yeah, that's kind of one of the weird experiences of the whole thing, right? It's like, and in some ways the film functions as a time capsule already like that too. There's a lot of locations we filmed in that don't exist anymore. Um, I feel like
I was
yeah, a
going to
few of the
ask
people that
that.
are in the film that lived in Seattle don't live in Seattle anymore. So it's such a strange, and we only shot it a few years ago. So
I was
yeah,
going to ask you about that, whether because you definitely, this is a film about community, and I was wondering whether how you found those neighborhoods, and now you're telling me they're not there any longer. That's kind of fascinating in
right,
itself.
yeah, and I mean some of them are too. It's like Know Your Place was more like the it's like specific places we shot, like a house or a store or a gym or whatever, like those things are gone. Um, but I would say, going back to sorry, can you ask the question again? I
Yeah,
kind of lost the
about the
train.
communities that you filmed in. You said some of the communities that you filmed in are no longer there.
Yes, yes, yes. So yeah, there's the store at the beginning of the film after they're playing basketball and they go get something. That place, Tana Market's no longer there on Cherry Street. That felt like an institution too. It was like when I recently came back to Seattle just a couple weeks ago and I went by there, it was like I was like, what? And then somebody told me, oh yeah, that was like a nightlife venue for a bit. And I was like, oh, this thing's been gone for like a year or two already. That's weird. And then a couple of the houses that we'd filmed in, um, they're just demolished, and like there's apartment buildings there now and things like that. And then yeah, like I said too, some of the people that were in the film they don't live in Seattle anymore and this and that. But I guess also just this idea of community, that was also kind of how we cast the film, which was really cool.
I was going to
So
ask you about that. about the
Yeah, yeah,
casting.
yeah. I'd written, I wrote the script with a few of the parts in mind. So the two leads, Robel and Fahmi, played by Joseph Smith and Nazi Mebratu, though they were already kind of in my head. A handful of the other smaller parts, like those were folks that I had come to know in our previous short film project and just like in the community as well. So I had written parts for them, but a friend of mine who's Ethiopian American, her name was Muraf. She and I kind of got together about casting the film. And a couple other friends and folks also kind of threw names in the hat and we auditioned people and stuff. But this was totally something where we really went through personal relationships and connections and sort of individual networks of folks to sort of reach out, you know, grab coffee, spend some time together, talk about the film. Hey, would you be open to doing this? And then sort of auditioning from there. But we really didn't audition more than 5 to 7 people for any one part. And the woman who plays Robel's mom, we call her Mama Salam, that was the one woman we auditioned for Robel's mom. And part of it was like this balancing act of just finding folks who would even be sort of willing to entertain the idea, right? Because everyone in the film is essentially a first-time actor.
Wow.
And they're either first-time actors or they're second-time actors because they were in that short film we made. But yeah, no one had had any experience doing this before. And so it was sort of balancing, yeah, just a general openness and willingness to like, yeah, I can do this with my schedule or something like that. And then
Oh, you've frozen up. Let's hope you come back.
to really do it. Yeah. So,
You froze up a little bit there.
oh,
So
sorry.
that's all right. This happens uh, periodically for sure. So the wait, okay, so you when you filmed this, did you I mean you filmed it all over, but that whole sense that you said the casting was, first time actors or second time actors. What was that like for you this is your first feature film too,
Right.
full length feature film. So what was that like for all of you kind of being in this together for the first time?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think it's it was really a sort of reciprocal relationship for sure. Like I think we all had a degree of like relative inexperience, right? And so um there was a lot of rehearsal involved to sort of hear the script out loud, sort of ad lib some things on the fly. Like I really encourage folks to like um play with what was on the page and sort of say it how they would really want to say that and sort of we sort of co-created the narrative of how they represented their characters on screen, right? So that it felt really true to life and true to the experience that we were portraying. Um, and I think that kind of malleability in the process was something that I was afforded as a director too, just because of the how new it was for everybody. Um, and I feel like I was able to just learn so much in the process and just how generous folks were with their time and their willingness and their openness and their sort of support. And like once it all kind of clicked in of like, oh, we're making like a real movie, like the way people really showed up for me and for the film. And I think that was all really something very unique and special. I think anybody that works in particularly in independent cinema, I think most of the experiences I hear about, folks come away really feeling like a family in some regard, right? And
Right.
so that's definitely I think what the sentiment we all walked away with. And many of us are all still in touch and we see each other in our daily lives and this and that. But yeah, it was as a first time sort of feature director, um it was very challenging in some ways, right? Because of that sort of inexperience on all sides and stuff. But I also felt like it was a perfect way of kind of learning the craft by doing it, both for the performers and for myself. I think where I definitely brought experience to the table was in terms of the visual language of the film. I think that was very intentional in the collaboration with our cinematographer, Nicholas Wiesnet. And like, because there's sort of an off the cuff nature to the performances, right? There's kind of a rawness to it, and there's this sort of naturalism that I was really trying to go for. But the camera doesn't chase that, right? It's not as loose as the performance. It's very intentional, and there was we wanted it to feel painterly and compositional and sort of bring this kind of like this sort of beautiful aesthetic to the proceedings, I guess, because we were also telling the story of a city as well, right? And so um that was the one of the real learning curves with the performances and the directing was like, hey, you can stay really loose, but like you have to hit this mark, right? Because we're not going to be moving the camera. So like that was definitely some of the stuff that um sort of like early on in production was like the bottleneck of right, okay, we rehearse this, the dialogue flows, the feeling flows, that all feels good, but now I have to sort of like put the rails back on because we're working in the frame now, right? So that was definitely an interesting process.
Well, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, obviously, this film has resonated with audiences because you have won so many awards at so many different film festivals. The list goes on and on and on of all the awards you've won. So obviously, this has become an audience favorite to see. What was it like? Were you able to come to Santa Barbara Film Festival when your film premiered here?
Yeah, I was able
So,
to attend. Yeah, it was
so
a good
let's
crowd.
talk a little bit about your Santa Barbara experience.
It was great.
Oh, you froze up again.
She did our
Say it
Q&A.
again. You froze up again. Start from the beginning. You froze up.
I was saying, yeah, our experience in Santa Barbara was great. That was our California premiere. So that was, that was fun to attend. But we had a great turnout at both screenings. Claudia Puig, who is the programming director, right,
Right.
of
Yeah.
the festival, she did
Yeah. She's
our
been on the show. Yes.
and she did our Q&A for the first night, and it was great to connect with her and hear about, her the way she sort of decided to program the film, and she watched it and just sort of emailed me, I guess, immediately, was saying like, hey, we're gonna do this thing. So
Exciting.
yeah, the crowd was great. It was it was interesting too, because I didn't realize somebody was kind of, I think it was maybe Claudia was sharing with me that sometimes the matinee or daytime screenings are actually sometimes fuller than the evening screenings with this festival in particular. And that was definitely true for our films as well. So I remember when they programmed us around like 1 o'clock or something in the afternoon, I was like, oh, okay, like we'll see what happens. But it was a full house. So
It's actually a perfect time.
yeah, exactly. I
Really,
I
people.
learned that pretty quickly.
Yeah, this film festival, people love going to this festival and they start early in the morning with the very first,
Yeah,
8 o'clock
yeah, totally.
screenings and they'll be full all day
Yeah,
long and people map out what they're going to go to.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a,
Yeah.
hardcore film festival.
No, and that was great. And it's that's one of the things that's been special about just all the sort of screenings, and Santa Barbara included, is the way that audiences have seemed to resonate with the film outside of Seattle, right? And that's that idea again of like localizing cinema, and it's so specific to a place, but um it's more than it's more than that in some ways, right? And the other one of the things that has happened often too in New York and in London and in Galway and Ireland and Florida and all these places is so many first generation kids, right, where their parents are immigrants from really anywhere, have come up and said, man, this felt like my childhood, or this felt like, the house I grew up in. And the
Yeah.
language is different, the food's different, the nuances are all different, but there's that sort of resonant experience there. And so
Very
that's been
rewarding.
really special to kind of
Z, I
to
wish we had more
engage with.
time. Unfortunately, our time is up. Where can people see Know Your Place?
So we are screening, we're doing a limited theatrical run right now. We're screening actually in Seattle this weekend, and we are announcing dates for DC, Atlanta, New York, Minneapolis, and potentially Toronto. We'll see about that.
Wow. Wow.
And then it's looking like we will be taking the film to platforms, and we'll have a digital release at some point November or December of this year. So that's when it'll be widely available.
Wonderful. Well, I wish you much success with the film,
Thank you.
continued success, and people, if you find Know Your Place, it will touch you for sure. Thank you, Zia. Have a
Thank you
great
very much.
day.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.